million workers will receive reduced rates this holiday period, beginning on Friday. Joining me now live to discuss this is report author Dr. Jim Stanford. Dr. Stanford, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Danica.
Firstly, tell us which sectors are set to be impacted the most?
The two broad sectors that will feel the most income losses from lower penalty rates are the retail sector and then the broad accommodation and food and beverage sector. So restaurants, cafes, clubs, that kind of thing. In
the report, you say workers in those areas are facing a wages hit of around $80 million across this public holiday period. Can you break down that figure for us?
Sure. I mean, on the one hand, for most of us, it's a wonderful thing that so many holidays are coming together, right? We get 4, in some states 5 public holidays plus 2 weekends. So a lot of Australians are planning to take the whole 10 days away from work. Many people, of course, have to show up to work during the holidays, and in the retail and hospitality sectors, they're going to work for less money than they would have without the cut in penalty rates. If you add up the number of people working, it's over 500,000 across those two sectors each day. What they get paid and how much they're losing from penalty rates, you'll get an $80 million combined hit on their wages just from this 10-day period.
And we know that penalty rates were first slashed by the Fair Work Commission back in 2017 and then followed by further cuts last year. So how much does that represent then in losses this financial year?
Well, for the whole year, of course, it's a much bigger number because you've got a Sunday every week. The Sunday rates were cut, and you've got a total of 12 or 13 public holidays across the year. So this year, the combined cut in the year as a whole will be over $600 million. But remember, Danica, the cuts are still being phased in. So if they're allowed to go ahead, we'll get another cut in Sunday penalties on July 1st, and then another cut on July 1st, 2020. If the whole thing goes ahead and penalty rates are reduced, then the annual hit to wages in those two sectors will be about $1.25 billion.
So then do you expect that it could potentially get worse?
By that time, the existing announced cuts will have been fully phased in, but over time, the dollar loss grows because two things are happening. Number one, more people are working, and number two, wages, the base wages against which penalty rates are calculated, are growing. So I think that I think it's time to have a real debate about why are we having a situation where some of the worst paid workers in the whole labor market are actually having their pay cut because of the ruling from the Commission.
$80 million across this public holiday period, that's a lot of money. I guess workers have the right to feel quite outraged by this.
Well, sure. I mean, we expect people to work on holidays in jobs that are either socially necessary or they're meeting, the need of people to go out and shop and have a good time at a cafe or a restaurant. But I think it's reasonable that they should be compensated for that extra sacrifice. And I think that the reduction in penalty rates really rubs against that traditional morality in Australia that we will compensate people for making this extra sacrifice.
On the other hand, though, how do you think that small business, for example, would react to this? Because it really was small business in the first place, saying that, Sunday trading, penalty rates would affect them. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, the business representatives promised at the time that this was being debated a couple of years ago that if their labor costs went down and penalty rates were reduced, they would be able to afford to hire more people to work. So the argument was phrased in terms of a trade-off between lower wages versus more jobs. Now we've got almost 2 years of actual experience since the penalty rates started to fall, and that promise has been proven totally hollow. In fact, the retail sector in particular has been one of the worst performing sectors in the whole economy in the period since penalty rates were cut. By our numbers, industries which did not reduce penalty rates have been increasing employment 5 times faster than these two broad industries which did reduce penalty rates. So there's no connection whatsoever to job creation. Of course, it does affect business. If you pay less in wages, you're going to have more in profits. But I think that has to be traded off against the reality that people who work on a holiday should be compensated extra for doing it.
The release of this report, of course, comes while we're in a federal election campaign, and penalty rates are an issue, with both sides pledging various penalty rates matters during this campaign. Doctor, do you think that this report, I guess, lays bare the impact that penalty rates are having?
I think it does remind Australians, even though the decision was made 2 years ago, we are coming up to a period where we've got a total of at least 6 holidays and Sundays clumped together in a 10-day period. And there are hundreds of thousands of individual Australians right in the middle of this election campaign who will lose potentially hundreds of dollars over that period. So in a way, I think this is an opportune moment to remember why penalty rates matter, remember why Australia has traditionally compensated people extra for working on these holidays, and then think through, as we approach the election, what kind of choices do we want to make about preserving that principle or abandoning that principle.
Dr. Jim Stanford, appreciate your insights this afternoon. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Do stay with us. Coming up after the break, Australia's biggest drink has revealed. We'll tell you which occupations have the highest rates of alcohol consumption.
One in 3 Australian workers are owed super. That's nearly $6 billion a year and growing. If only our politicians changed the laws to make employees pay super at the same time as wages. It's time to get your hands back on your super.